Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. So I'm really sad to say, that this morning I actually recorded the lecture, but apparently it didn't record for whatever reason. I really hate iMovie. So now I'm going to be redoing this lecture, but on the upside, I'm going to be doing it in a clearer way than the way that I did it initially because it's my second run through, obviously. Um, Okay, so let me just start by saying, okay, basically, I already told you guys a little bit about how Levinas is presenting his material, and he's supposed to be a philosopher that's coming after existentialism. At least he opposes himself to the existentialists. He's not, entirely not like the existentialists, but at the same time, he's also not entirely like the existentialists. I mean, if you want to give it a title, like he's a phenomenology of life, this is how he wants to think of himself. You'll see why in the discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two separate parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about our relationship to the world, and then I'm going to talk about an image of the world that he has, which is different from the way the existentialists have it, and also Husserl has it. And then I'm going to talk about our relationship to others. Okay, so I'm also, I'm going to try to tell you the page numbers most of the time, but on some of these slides, I don't have the page numbers. So if I, leave out the page numbers, ultimately you can just read through it. And I don't think there are that many pages. There's also one discussion that you guys don't have the pages for, but it's fine. We'll just kind of go with what I have, and I'll talk about the assignment, I guess, some other time. I'm thinking of just maybe giving you the existential like Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and Levinas as options, maybe just like one longer assignment instead of having it as two assignments because it's so late in the semester. And then on Thursday we'll have the live session so that we can talk about this stuff. Okay, so here's the first relationship that he's going to talk about. So remember that Husserl had our relationship to the world is a form of representation. It's representing the world, and Heidegger had criticized this as being too theoretical, and so he had then given us this other way that we can relate to the world, which is in terms of dealings. And now Levinas is going to tell us neither representation, neither thinking of the world as a theoretical object, nor thinking of the world in terms of dealing with equipment are the primary relationship. There's actually a more fundamental relationship than both of them, and this is the relationship that he calls living from. So here's him talking. So he says, this is on page 110, 111, he says, "We live from good soup, air, light, spectacles, work, ideas, sleep, etc. These are not objects of representation. We live from them. Nor is what we live from a means of life, as the pen is a means with respect to the letter it permits us to write. Nor a goal of life, as communication is the goal of the letter. The things we live from are not tools, not even implements in the Heideggerian sense of the term." So here's him, saying, we live from good soup. It's like he wants to say that our relationship to the world is one where the world is something that we need to sustain us. And we live from, you can say we live from the air that we breathe, from the light, that allows us to see, from the scenes of life that we get to experience, from our work, from our enjoyment of this work, from our ideas, from the sleep that we get, and he says, if you think about these things, these aren't representations, nor are they like instruments, or tools or equipment, right? When you sleep, this is not equipment for waking up, and it's not something that you're representing. It's something that you live from. It's something that sustains you. He says, moreover, sorry, let me just see what I can do about this. Whoops. Okay. He says, moreover, whereas the recourse to the instrument implies finality and indicates a dependence with regard to the other, living from delineates independence itself, the independence of enjoyment and of its happiness, which is the original pattern of all independence. Conversely, the independence of happiness always depends on a content. It is the joy or the pain of breathing, looking, eating, working, handling the hammer and the machine, etc. So now he says, these things are not tools, they're not representations, they're rather kind of the original meaning of our independence. This is what Sartre would have called freedom, and now Levinas is telling us that our freedom actually comes from being able to live from the world, from the fact that the world gives us a sort of happiness, which is the joy or the pain that we feel when we breathe, when we look, when we see things, when we eat things, when we work on things, even when we use pieces of equipment. He says, nourishment as a means of invigoration is the transmutation of the other into the same, which is the essence of enjoyment. An energy that is other, recognized as other, recognized, we will see, as sustaining the very act that is directed upon it. And it becomes enjoyment, my own energy, my all, my strength, me. All enjoyment is in this sense alimentation. So here, look at the way he's described it. He says, the things we live from, they nourish us, okay? And nourishment is transmuting, so taking the thing that is outside of you and turning it to the thing that you are. The coffee that I drink is now something outside of me, but I consume it, and in consuming it, its energy, which is something other than myself, becomes my own. In fact, not just my own, it becomes my own strength, he says, my own energy, my enjoyment. It becomes, in fact, me. And this, in this sense, he says, all enjoyment is in this sense alimentation. So the relationship is living from, and in living from the world, we enjoy the world. He says, hunger is need, is privation in the primal sense of the word, and thus precisely living from. It's not a simple becoming conscious of what fills life. These contents are lived, they feed life. One lives one's life. To live is a sort of transitive verb, and the contents of life are its direct objects. So rather than talking about representing the world or existing in the world or dealing with the world, he wants to say we live in the world, and to live is to enjoy this life. So a little bit later he says, I don't know what's going on with my slides. I don't know what's going on with my slides. Okay. So he says, if living from, this is now page 112 and 113. He says, if living from is not simply a representation of something, living from also does not fit into the categories of activity and potency. Moreover, action itself, which unfolds on the plane of being, enters into our happiness. We live from acts, and from the very act of being, just as we live from ideas and sentiments. What I do and what I am is at the same time that from which I live. We relate ourselves to it, and a relation that is neither theoretical nor practical. Behind theory and practice, there is enjoyment of theory and of practice. The egoism of life. The final relation is enjoyment, happiness. And then he says, enjoyment is not a psychological state amongst others, the affective tonality of empiricist psychology, but the very pulsation of the I. So here he's just kind of repeated this idea, that behind theory and behind practice, there is the enjoyment of theory and practice. It's like we take pleasure in reading this material, and even when we use a hammer, we take pleasure in hammering and hammering well. So these things are more primitive. Our relationship of enjoying the world is more primitive than theorizing about the world or of dealing with it or making things with it. He calls this the egoism of life. It's like, why are you motivated to do things for yourself? It's because you enjoy them, and this is, the fundamental relationship that we have. He describes it at the end by saying, he says, enjoyment is not a psychological state, just one of many many psychological states. Rather, it's the very pulsation of the I. It's like, just think of the heart, and the heart, for you to live, your heart has to beat, and for your heart to beat, it has to have oxygen and it has to have the blood flow. It's like the I is neither I think, therefore I am, nor, the I that's produced as a subsequent thing that happens from being part of the they. First of all, it's its own pulsation, its own activity, which is the fact that it's kind of something that is sustained by consuming things in the world. Okay, so this is the pulsation of the I. I don't know what's going on with my slides. Okay. He says, bread and labor do not divert me from the bare fact of existence or occupy the emptiness of my time. Enjoyment is the ultimate consciousness of all the contents that fill my life. It embraces them. The life that I earn is not a bare existence. It is a life of labor and nourishments. These are contents which do not preoccupy it only, but which occupy it, which entertain it, of which it is enjoyment. So you can now here start to see how he's against the existentialists. He says, look, the bread that I eat and the labor, you guys doing your assignments or doing your homework are not things that are you existing. Existing is too empty. It's not, that you're filling the emptiness of time with these things. It's rather that these are the contents of your time. These are your life. They're not things that preoccupy you and divert you from merely existing. They are your existing. So life is not really a life that we exist, we don't, as the existentialists always said, we exist in the world, Levinas wants to say, no, we live in the world. Existence is this diminished thing, if you really think about it. In fact, what we do is we live the world that we, occupy, we eat from it. In a chunk that I'm unfortunately not going to be able to read, he says, Dasein is never hungry, and this is wrong, because our life is not, this plain existence. It's rather something that we enjoy and that is filled up by things that happen in it. To say that we live from contents is therefore not to affirm that we resort to them as to conditions for ensuring our life, taken as the bare fact of existing. So the things that we live from are not just, things to ensure that we continue living. They're not just us existing. He says the bare fact of life is never bare. Life is not the naked will to be, an ontological concern for this life. Life's relation with the very conditions of its life become the nourishment and the content of that life. Life is the love of life, a relation with contents that are not my being, but more dear than my being. Thinking, eating, sleeping, reading, working, warming oneself in the sun, distinct from my substance but constituting it, these contents make up the worth of my life. When reduced to pure and naked existence, like the existence of the shadows Ulysses visits in Hades, life dissolves into a shadow. So here he's telling us, as he puts it really, life is the love of life, in the sense that when we live, we don't live just to exist. We don't eat just to exist. Rather, these are the things that make this life worth living. In a way, it's that you're not even interested in maintaining your own existence. What you're really interested in is living. And if some things are taken away from you in your living, then your life becomes not worth living. And these are not just you yourself being taken away. These are that if you don't have food to eat, your life is not worth living. If you can't, read, if you can't go out into the sun, if you can't walk, if you can't think, all of this is taking away from your life. And indeed, your life becomes meaningless at this point. It has nothing that fills it. So much so that it might be worth dying for these things. Dying for just a piece of bread, dying for, freeing yourself in your thoughts, or for getting some sleep, and so on. So you can really see, how this is very informed by the situation that he must be facing and, that he faced in World War II. That in some sense, to continue to exist is not enough. You need also to exist and to live this life and to enjoy this life and to gain happiness from it. And these things are worth fighting for as much as your life is worth fighting for. Your life without these things that fill it is not a life at all. That's what would be mere existing. But we don't want mere existing, and mere existing is not a thing, It's too empty, in that sense. He says, these contents make up the worth of my life, and the worth of my life is my life. He says, if you reduce it to pure and naked existence, then it's like you've turned it into the shadows of, or the shades in Hades. So he's now referring to kind of the Greek afterlife, where in the Greek afterlife, it's not a heaven or a hell. You're not tortured or feeling lots of pleasure. In a way, being tortured and feeling lots of pleasure are both better than what life in Hades is like, which is that you're basically like a ghost. He says life dissolves into a shadow. Actually, a really nice image comes from this movie, Pirates of the Caribbean. I've only seen one of them, but in that one, I just remember always the scene where at some point, I guess Jack Sparrow, is talking to the skeletons that, are, I guess, the bad guys in the movie. And he, asks, or somebody asks, well, why are you guys unhappy? After all, you guys can live forever, as these skeletons, as these creatures. And their answer is this. They say, because we drink and that doesn't quench our thirst. And we eat and that doesn't fill us up. And we sleep and we're not rested. Our life is eternal. That's true. We exist forever. But nothing fills that life. Nothing gives it joy. So it's not a life that's worth living. It's a curse at this point. Okay, and so now I'm just going to keep having trouble with this, with these slides. I don't know what's going on with them. He says, I'm just going to read some fragments. These are from pages 133, 134. He says, one can like one's job, enjoy these material gestures and the things that permit the accomplishing of them. One can transform the curse of labor into sport. So here he's just pointing out that even as you work, you can enjoy that work. And this is something that matters to you and something that fills up that life. A little bit later, he says, to live is to play. Despite the finality and tension of instinct to live from something without this something having the sense of a goal or an ontological means. Simply play or enjoyment of life. It is carefreeness with regard to existence, which has a positive meaning. So existence has a positive meaning and it's carefree. It consists in sinking one's teeth fully into the nutriments of the world, agreeing to the world as wealth, releasing its elemental essence. In enjoyment, the things revert to their elemental qualities. So here you can also think of this, as an interesting kind of component. It's like as long as we were doing Sartre and Heidegger and Husserl, there was never a sense that Dasein or the transcendental ego were ever eating or sleeping. There was never the sense that they could play or that they could enjoy life. Everything was so serious in a sense. And Levinas wants to insist that there's before all of this, there's this kind of a happiness that we feel at living. To, like he puts it, to live is to enjoy life. And so he wants to say that there's a sense of a carefreeness in life that comes from this element. He's not saying it's everything, but he's saying it's a component that was missed by the existentialists. He puts it kind of dramatically. In general, he's dramatic, He says, the need for food does not have existence as its goal, but food. So it's like when you want to eat, you don't want to eat just so you exist. You also want to eat just because you want to eat, because it's yummy. And, this is not nothing, he wants to say. A little bit later, on now pages 114, 115. By the way, I'm jumping around in the pages because I guess the order that he talks in, he writes in a weird way, but I hope you know that by me describing it in this way, you'll be able to read it in the order that it's given. He says, though it thus depends on what is not itself, this dependence is not without a counterpart which is in the final analysis nullifies it. What we live from does not enslave us. We enjoy it. Need cannot be interpreted as a simple lack. So here he's telling us that in that sense, we don't have the freedom that Sartre talks about because we're not just independent beings. Our independence depends on something. We are independent, but we're independent as long as I can eat, as long as I can sleep, as long as I can walk, and as long as I can breathe. These give me my freedom, but my freedom depends on them. And they're not things that enslave me. They're the things that fill up my life and make me, as a result, enjoy it. So we can't interpret this need for things as a simple lack, that I lack something and now I get this thing. He says living from is the dependence that turns into sovereignty. So living from is a dependence that turns into sovereignty. It makes you free, into happiness. And it's essentially egoist. It's what makes your life a life worth living. Just think about Heidegger saying that the only thing that distinguishes you are your birth and death. Levinas wants to say, it's not just your birth and death, it's you enjoying yourself. It's the moments of your life which you enjoyed. This makes up your life, not just these two moments. He says, need, a happy dependence, is capable of satisfaction, like a void which gets filled. Physiology teaches us that need is a lack. That man could be happy for his needs indicates that in human need, the physiological plane is transcended. So he says, yes, if you take a biological point of view, yes, this is what is needed to sustain me. And so need is in that sense a lack. But he's saying it's a lack that can be filled. And it's filling, it gives you pleasure, and this pleasure is not nothing. So in this sense, our need transcends our just biological need for these things. They're things that go into the realm of our existence, of our taking pleasure in the life that we live. And now at the same time, the fact that we live from this life means that our independence is not pure independence, because you can lose these things. You cannot have food to eat, and you can not be able to sleep, and you can not be allowed to walk outside or breathe clean air. And these things take away from your life. He says, I'm not sure which page this is, but he says, the uncertainties of the future that mar happiness remind enjoyment that its independence envelops a dependence. So it's that, these things can also produce an anxiety in us because you want to make sure that you have food in the future, that you can sleep in the future, that you can breathe in this future. This reminds enjoyment that its independence is actually dependent on dependence, on something that is outside of it. He says, enjoyment, this is now page 115, enjoyment in relation with nourishment, which is the other of life. So remember, now the picture is that the world is out there, but you can consume it. It can make it inside of you, and by taking it to the inside, by taking the world outside of you into the inside of you, either in terms of ideas or in terms of sleep or in terms of the food that you consume, all of this fills up your life. So, and gives it the independence that it has. So he says, enjoyment, which is the other of life, is an independence, the independence of happiness. The life that is life from something is happiness. Life is affectivity and sentiment. To live is to enjoy life. To despair of life makes sense only because originally life is happiness. Suffering is a failing of happiness. It's not correct to say that happiness is an absence of suffering. Happiness is made up not of an absence of needs, whose tyranny and imposed character one denounces, but of the satisfaction of all needs. For the privation of need is not just a privation, but is a privation in a being that knows the surplus of happiness. Privation in a being gratified. Happiness is accomplishment. It exists in a soul satisfied, and not in a soul that has extirpated its needs, a castrated soul. And because life is happiness, it is personal. The personality of the person, the ipsiety, which is the individuality of the I, which is more than the particularity of the atom and of the individual, is the particularity of the happiness of enjoyment. Enjoyment accomplishes the atheist separation. So he says a lot here, but he's saying, first of all, life is affectivity and sentiment. It's being able to feel things and being able to have emotions towards these things. It's to enjoy these things. And he says that even despair, when we're depressed or when we're anxious or when we're hurt in life, that stuff only makes sense because we're relating it to this other state, which is the happiness of life and of life being joyful and being filled up. It's not that you want to say that, what does he say? Happiness is not the absence of suffering, rather it's a surplus. It's like life is not a neutral, life is a positive. And to live life is to be enjoying life. He says it exists in a soul satisfied and not in a castrated soul. And because this life is happiness, it's personal. Because you can enjoy, there's your sadness and your joy and your, anxieties and your, pleasures. That's what makes your life personal. That's why it matters that you're you. It's what gives you your particularity as a being. Yes, everybody is born and dies, and that your birth and your death are separate, but that's not the only thing that separates you. What separates you is that you don't enjoy when I enjoy. You enjoy when you enjoy, and I enjoy when I enjoy. So he says, enjoyment is what accomplishes our separation. This is what makes us us. He uses here the atheist separation, and I'm going to come back to why he calls the separation when you're by yourself atheist. I think I talked about it briefly in class, but I'll talk about it some more here. Now on page 145, 146, he says, the happiness of enjoyment flourishes on the pain of need, and thus depends on another. It is a stroke of good fortune, a chance. But this conjecture justifies neither the denunciation of pleasure as illusory, nor the characterization of man in the world as dereliction. So here he's saying, look, the happiness of enjoyment comes as a good fortune. It's a good fortune in the sense that you can't always count on enjoying your life. You can lose your sleep, and you can lose food, and you cannot have a job, and you can be anxious, and all of this can take away from your life. So when you're happy, it's like it's a happy accident. But this doesn't mean that life doesn't have this happiness in it. It doesn't mean that your life or that pleasure is an illusion or anything like that. He says, at the origin, there is a being gratified, a citizen of paradise. So he's describing life. He's saying at its beginning, it's like that we're there as happy beings, as beings who are enjoying life from the scenes that we see, from the sounds that we hear, the smells that we smell, the air that we breathe. All of this is a positive value. And he says, it's a being gratified, a citizen of paradise. The emptiness felt implies that the need which becomes aware of it abides already in the midst of enjoyment. Be it that of the air one breathes. It anticipates the joy of satisfaction, which is better than ataraxy. Far from putting the sensible life into question, pain takes pleasure within its horizons and refers to the joy of living. Already and henceforth, life is loved. So here he's just kind of emphasizing again and again that pain and suffering are not something that proves that life is not happy. They're actually assuming that life is happy. This is why you can be in pain or you can be depressed, because you know that there's this alternative which is positive, and this positivity is what lets the negativity show up. He says, every opposition to life takes refuge in life and refers to its value. So it's like before, I can be depressed, before I can, feel an opposition or feel like I hate life, I have to have first valued life. He says, okay, well, I'm actually going to skip here and then move to here. Again, he's going to just keep emphasizing this stuff. He says, need, therefore, can be characterized neither as freedom, since it is dependence, nor as passivity, since it lives from what already familiar and without secret, does not subjugate it, but gladdens it. So need is not pure freedom because you depend on something, but it's also not just passive. It's not just you existing because you live from something, and this stuff gladdens your life. It doesn't just subjugate it. The philosophers of existence, this is what he means, the existentialists, who emphasize dereliction, misconstrue the opposition arising between the I and its joy, an opposition due to the disquietude that insinuates itself into enjoyment. So he says they kind of misconstrue the relationship between the I and enjoyment. I'm skipping, over a lot of details, and I mean, it would be too hard to just go into all of it, but I just want you guys to get the big picture for now. He says, being is here, well, I'm actually going to skip a little bit. He says, suicide is tragic, for death does not bring as a resolution to all the problems to which birth gave rise, and is powerless to humiliate the values of the earth. Hence, Macbeth's final cry in confronting death, defeated because the universe is not destroyed at the same time as his life. Suffering at the same time, despairs for being riveted to being, and loves the being to which it is riveted. It knows the impossibility of quitting life. What tragedy, what comedy. So here he says, it's like even in suicide, it's like you continue to love life even in suicide. It's worth killing yourself because you're not enjoying life, and life is enjoyable. You want to enjoy life, but now the life has turned into an unenjoyable thing. So you kill yourself, but even this killing oneself is in the presence of this enjoyment. It's like a lament. The suicide is a lament that I'm not enjoying life. So it already assumes this enjoyment. Okay, so here's now one component. This life as the love of life, and that it's living from, and that it's enjoying of life. And its enjoyment is now being described as the taking of the other into the same, right? So you take what is outside of you and you make it inside of you. Okay, so now if you kind of imagine that as enjoyment and living from is the counterpart to representation and to dealing with the world, now he wants to also describe to us another image of the world. So neither the world as a theoretical object nor the world as a world of equipment. And this is what he calls the element. I don't think you guys have those parts in your course packet. But let me just read to you. It's just 2 slides, but I'll read them to you because they're interesting, and it'll make up for the fact that I'm not there. Okay. So he says, enjoyment precisely does not reach them, these things, qua things, so as things. Things come to representation from a background from which they emerge and to which they return in the enjoyment we can have of them. In enjoyment, the things are not absorbed in the technical finality that organizes them into a system. This is the equipment. They take form within a medium in which we take hold of them. They are found in space, in the air, on the earth, in the street, along the road. Let me just read some more and then I'll say something about it. The medium has its own density. Things refer to possession, can be carried off, are furnishings. The medium from which they come to me lie escheat, a common fund or terrain, essentially non-possessible, nobodies. Earth, sea, light, city. Every relation or possession is situated within the non-possessible, which envelops or contains without being able to be contained or envelop. We shall call it the elemental. So here's now a picture that he's painting. He's saying, look, when I take a single object and I try to analyze it as a theoretical object, or even when I use it as a piece of equipment, I take it from a background, right? If I take the branch and I break it off the tree and now I use it as a stick to walk with or to, build something with, I took it first from the tree. If I isolate an atom in a vacuum and put it in my lab and work with it, this is because, first of all, I was able to take it from somewhere. Where is this place that I'm taking all of my equipment and all of my theoretical objects from? So that's what he calls the elemental, okay, or the element. He says it's the medium or the background from which everything is taken. And it's something that you can't possess. It's like reality, you can't, it's not your earth, and it's not your sea, and it's not your light, and it's not your air. You can take a little bit of it, you can, pick fruits off trees or branches off trees, or you can take stuff to think about and to deal with in the world, but they're all taken from a background which is something that contains you, but which you can't contain. The world is outside of you and outside you in a way that's non-possessible. This is the elemental. And this is, as he puts it, the medium. It's like the earth, the street, you walking on the road, you being able to sustain yourself physically and to stand. This stuff is the stuff that you take things from, but you don't take it. He says, the navigator who makes use of the sea and the wind dominates these elements, but he does not thereby transform them into things. They retain the indetermination of elements, despite the precision of the laws that govern them, which can be known and taught. The element has no forms containing it. It is content without form. Or rather, it has but a side, the surface of the sea and of the field, the edge of the wind. So actually he'll say a little bit more that will be helpful. But he's saying it's like, even when we understand the physics behind an object, it's not like we've turned it into a purely theoretical object. It remains outside of our control. It remains part of nature as a whole, the world as a whole. It's like that the element has content without form. We give form to things by using them as equipment or by using them as theoretical objects, but they themselves are formless. They're just the stuff that has, as he says, just a side. So let me just read a little bit more and you'll see what he means by just a side, just a single side. He says, to be sure, a thing likewise presents itself by but one unique side, but we can circle around it. And the reverse is equivalent to the obverse. All the points of view are equivalent. The depth of the element prolongs it till it is lost in the earth and in the heavens. Nothing ends, nothing begins. So think about, the piece of equipment. I can leave the workshop that is my, kitchen or my bedroom. I can walk into my office or I can walk out of my office. I can, walk into the lab and explore this atom or not explore this atom. I can have this cup and look at it from this side or from that side. But the element is not like that. The element has a depth that makes it such that it extends forever into the earth and into the heavens. As he puts it, nothing ends, nothing begins. So just think of it as, it's like anytime you're here, there's a horizon for your perception. You look out into the sky and the sky just goes on and on and on until it's lost. You look at the earth and it goes on and on and on until it's lost. All of this, in kind of infinitely expansive nature of our reality, of the surrounding world, this is not possessible. You can take in the view of the sky, but you can't take the sky itself. You can't, you can drink from the water, but you can't take all the water. I mean, of course, people are delusional and they think that they own oceans and they own, the earth that they're on, but they don't, If anything, it sustains them, but they don't, they can't take a hold of it. And I think that we kind of start to see this, with all of these environmental disasters, we really have to say that the environmental disasters are not a disaster for the environment. They're a disaster for us, because we're going to die. The world is going to remain over. It doesn't, we're the ones that live from it. It doesn't live from us. It just takes us back into it. He says, to tell the truth, the element has no side at all. One does not approach it. So you don't get closer to the air, and you don't get closer to, the skies. You're in always this permanently, you're always steeped in it. It's like, you've been placed inside a liquid, and the liquid is all around you. There is no moving away from the liquid. He says the relation adequate to its essence discovers it precisely as a medium. One is steeped in it. I am always within the element. Man has overcome the elements only by surmounting this interiority without issue by the domicile or the home, which confers upon him an extraterritoriality, upon him or her. He gets a foothold in the element by a side already appropriated, a field cultivated by me, the sea in which I fish and moor my boats, the forest in which I cut wood, and all these acts, all this labor refer to the home. Man plunges into the element from the home. So, what's he saying? He's saying, it's like the world has just one side. You're always in the element, and there's no getting out of the element, and there's no turning around it. If you do face the world from someplace, it's that you face it from inside the home. You go out into the world, and for humanity, it's like the home, and he actually has a long discussion of homes, the home is a place that we build to give us a protection from the element. Because he'll also say that the element, it's generous, but also cruel at the same time. The fruit bears trees that I can eat from, but one day it could just go barren, and then I don't have any food to eat. One day the sky is sunny and it's beautiful and I can walk out. And then the next day there's a storm, and now my enjoyment is taken away from me. So for humanity to protect itself from the element and from its overwhelming nature, that it's everywhere and it can, you both need it to stand on, to walk on, to breathe from, to enjoy, to escape from it, or to take a break from it. Our only way is we can't exit it. We can't exit from nature. What we can do is we can take nature and build an interiority. In the same way that your mind is your interior aspect and then the world is outside of you, it's like before the mind, there was the home. There was that you took the trees and their branches, and then you used these branches to build yourself a little space that now becomes the space that you're in, and now you're protected. You find a cave and you sit in the cave. You hide when it rains under the tree. These things become your home. And from here, you have safety and you have distance from the element. At the same time, not a distance that is outside the element. Rather, the home is built out of the element, but it's an interiority within this element. Let me just read a bit more, and I'll just give you a nice example, or an example I like. He or she is within what she possesses, such that we shall be able to say that the home, conditioned for all property, renders the inner life possible. The I is thus at home with itself. Though through the home, our relation with space as distance and extension is substituted for the simple bathing in the element. But the adequate relation with the element is precisely bathing. The interiority of immersion is not convertible into exteriority. I mean, some of this is a little bit complicated, but ignore some of it. Here's what I like about it, is that he literally will say later that you have time to think because you have a home, because you can, otherwise you're just at the mercy of nature. Otherwise you're struggling from moment to survive and, to make sure that you have food to eat and there's fruit on the trees. Just think about like these hunter-gatherers. It's like we had time to think when we could build a home for ourselves and take stuff from nature and preserve it in the home and then eat it, and then now we can sit back and we can, contemplate the rain as it falls and contemplate the starry sky, because you can't contemplate the starry sky if you're worried that wolves are going to eat you, or if you're worried that it's going to be too cold and you're going to freeze to death, or if insects or snakes are going to bite you. So the home really gives us time. It gives us time to think, and it gives us distance. Later, Levinas will say that nature is only serene from behind the window, right? It's only beautiful because you can escape from it. If you couldn't escape from it, you would be at its mercy, and it wouldn't look so beautiful. It would be something that's threatening. He also calls it, he often says the elemental are the faceless gods. It's, just think about the Greeks, embodying the oceans or the lightning in gods. And they're faceless because you can't look at the water, you can't face the water and ask it to do something for you. If the flood happens from in a way that is overwhelming to you. So it's like God in relationship to you, and it's a God that you can't ask it anything. It doesn't face you. It doesn't, you can't, send a request to the water to not flood. And so, for the Greeks, they had to kind of invent these gods that would then be faced, that you could commit sacrifices for, and so on. He says, I said I was going to give you a good example. If you've played the video game Minecraft, I really love Minecraft for kind of phenomenology, because it really describes so many of these moments in phenomenology. You start out, you spawn into a world, and the world is... nothing ends, nothing begins. It's all randomly generated, and you can sit and walk around, and sometimes you find fruits on trees, or you find animals laying around. You can, live in Minecraft from moment to moment, just eating, but then night falls, and in night it's scary, and things are bad, and, the game pushes you to build your home, And now once you've built your home, you feel safety, and you're like, okay, now I need to build my bed. Now I can sleep. Now I can, make sure that I preserve, additional food, so that I'm not running around all day in the game, just trying to collect my next meal. And eventually, once you've learned how to do this stuff, the way you do it is you build the home, and now you have to build pieces of equipment. You have to build hammers, and you have to build, pickaxes and axes. And now it's like you've moved from the first layer, which is the element, to the world of equipment, where now you're in the Heideggerian mode of dealing with the world, building things. You make your house, you make your farm, you make whatever, and now you're dealing with the world. And then once you get far enough into the game, I played, unfortunately, 3 years of this game, but once you get far enough, you can even start to think about the world theoretically, because you can start to wonder about the properties of different materials in this world. You can discover, for instance, that water and lava, when combined in the right way, will produce rock, so that you can build entire skyscrapers. And this is a scientific property of these things that were around you. If you look at the water and you see how it drains, you can learn theoretical things about it. So in the game, it's like you go through all of the phenomenological layers. You start out in the element, you turn it into a world of equipment. From the world of equipment, then you have the distance in order to think about that world that you're surrounded with. So he says, hence we can say that the element comes to us from nowhere. The side it presents to us does not determine an object. It remains entirely anonymous. It is wind, earth, sea, sky, air. Indetermination here is not equivalent to the infinite surpassing limits. It precedes the distinction between the finite and the infinite. It is not a question of a something where the idea... it is not a question of something. Let's just stop here. Okay. So now, I've kind of gone through this new picture of the world and a new relationship to the world. So now let's talk about others. And, I pointed this out, but Levinas is most famous for his discussion of others. I actually really like his stuff on the world and our relationship to the world. I find that stuff really interesting. but this is the stuff that he's most popular for. Okay, so here's how he kind of approaches it. He says, and this is on page 33. I'm not sure if you have this page in your reading, but in any case, he says, the true life is absent, but we are in the world. Metaphysics arises and is maintained in this alibi. So, the true life is absent, but we are in the world. What he means by this is that, and then he says, metaphysics arises and maintains itself in this alibi. So he's saying that, think about, just back to Descartes, where Descartes, first of all discovers that I think, therefore I exist, and now he wants to try to discover reality outside of his own mind. It's like, this is, the picture that metaphysics produces, that, I have my subjective experience, the world as it strikes me, and then the question is, what is the world outside of me like? And the world outside of me, I'm at once in the world, so, I'm in the world, but the true world or the true life is absent. It's something that is outside of my experience. This is what metaphysics says. It says there's your world of experience, and then metaphysics is what is beyond experience, reality in itself, not reality as it seems to me. And this is, what we would think of as metaphysics. That metaphysics is the nature of reality, and then there's, our experience of reality, and there's this attempt to bridge our experience of reality and reality as it is. So let's just look at what he does with this. He says, metaphysics is turned towards the elsewhere and the otherwise and the other. For in the most general form it has assumed in the history of thought, it appears as a movement going forth from a world that is familiar to us, whatever be the yet unknown lands that bound it or that hides it from view, from an at-home which we inhabit, towards an alien outside of oneself, towards a yonder. So this is just what I've been saying, that it's like metaphysics is a movement from what is familiar to me to this unfamiliar world, the world as I don't experience it, the world outside of my experience in itself. He says the term of this movement, the elsewhere or the other, is called other in an eminent sense. No journey, no change of climate or of scenery could satisfy the desire bent towards it. The other, metaphysically desired, is not other like the bread I eat, the land in which I dwell, the landscape I contemplate, like sometimes myself for myself, this I, that other. I can feed on these realities and to a very great extent satisfy myself, as though I had simply been lacking them. Their alterity is thereby reabsorbed into my identity as a thinker or possessor. By the way, alterity just means otherness. The metaphysical desire tends towards something else entirely, towards the absolutely other. So this is metaphysics, that it's like to experience the world as it is in itself. There's nothing I can do. I can't go to that world. No change of climate or of scenery could satisfy my desire for the metaphysical desire. And he describes it as desire. I desire to be outside of myself, to exit to a world outside of myself. And it's not like, the food or, all the stuff that I can enjoy. It's not about, taking in, the coffee into me, or going to a distant land, or seeing some new scenery. It's something that is absolutely other. That's what metaphysics desires. It desires the world as I don't experience it. So he says, now this is a little bit later, he says, the metaphysical desire has another intention. It desires beyond everything that can simply complete it. So the metaphysical desire is a desire for what is absolutely other, and it's like it's not attainable. It's not something that you can get to or complete. Desire is absolute if the desiring being is mortal and the desired invisible. So desire is absolute if the desiring being is mortal if you are limited in this way, and the desired thing is invisible, it's beyond you. Invisibility does not denote an absence of relation. It implies relations with what is not given, of which there is no idea. Vision is an adequation of the idea with the thing, a comprehension that encompasses. So here he's saying invisibility is not an absence of relation, it's rather a relation to what is not given. When I think of the metaphysical, I relate to something that is not given, of which I have no idea. Vision, by contrast, when I see something, allows me to encompass the thing that I see. If I see you, then you're contained in my vision. So it's like I have an idea which can contain the thing that is seen. Non-adequation, by contrast, does not denote a simple negation or an obscurity of the idea, but beyond the light and beyond the night, beyond the knowledge measuring beings, the inordinateness of desire. Besides the hunger one satisfies, the thirst one quenches, and the senses one allays, metaphysics desires the other beyond satisfactions, where no gesture by the body to diminish the aspiration is possible, where it is not possible to sketch out any known caress, nor invent any new caress. A desire without satisfaction, which precisely understands the remoteness, the alterity, and the exteriority of the other. For desire, this alterity or this otherness, non-adequate to the idea, has a meaning. It is understood as the alterity of the other and of the Most High. And here he capitalizes other. So it's like you desire something that is way beyond me, that is not attainable by me, that my ideas cannot fully capture. And it's like I can't invent a new movement, a new thing that I can do to absorb that thing into me. And he calls this is the absolutely other and the Most High. So it's, the metaphysical truth of reality or something like that, something fundamental. Well, here's now what Levinas wants to do with this. In short, the idea is that Levinas is going to transform metaphysics, which is typically a desire for the nature of reality, into the only thing that he thinks is really other to me. And what's really other to me is you. It's the other person. The other person, this is what it means to transcend my own experience. If I transcend my own experience, I don't go into the world as it is in itself. I go into the experience of the other. But I can't go to the experience of the other. I can't live the world as you, and I can't be you. You're always the thing that is beyond anything that I can do. So for him, metaphysics, the metaphysical desire, becomes a desire for the other, now the other understood as the other subject. So he transforms metaphysics, as he puts it, into ethics, right? That it's no longer about discovering the fundamental nature of reality. It's about discovering the thing that is beyond me. And what is the thing beyond me? Well, the other person who I can't contain with my ideas of them. Okay, so now here's how he's going to describe it. He's going to say it's like our senses allow us to absorb things into us, but there is something that is beyond the senses. So let's hear him talk about it. This is on page 194. Inasmuch as the access to beings concerns vision, so insofar as you grasp beings through your vision, it dominates those beings. Vision dominates the being that it sees. It exercises a power over them. A thing is given, it offers itself to me. In gaining access to it, I maintain myself within the same. So I still myself, yet I see the thing that is outside of me. By contrast to this, he's going to talk about the face. For him, this is, Levinas's language for the other. Instead of talking about the other, you talk about the face. So he says, the face is present in its refusal to be contained. In this sense, it cannot be comprehended, that is, encompassed. It is neither seen nor touched. For an visual and tactile sensation, the identity of the I envelops the alterity of the object, which becomes a content. The alterity of the other does not depend on any quality that would distinguish him from me. For a distinction of this nature would precisely imply between us that community of genus which already nullifies alterity. Ignore this quote for the time being. And yet the other does not purely and simply negate the I. Total negation, of which murder is the temptation and the attempt, refers to an antecedent relation. The other remains infinitely transcendent, infinitely foreign. His face, in which his epiphany is produced and which appeals to me, breaks with the world that is common to us. Speech proceeds from absolute distance. So here's now what he's saying. He's saying it's like the face of the other is not something that I can contain. I can contain it in a visual appearance. You can see my face, you can touch my face, you can even grab the whole head and take it to you. But none of this brings the other closer to you. It's a bit like, what Sartre had been saying, right? This absolute otherness or this distance without distance. Here, he wants to say that the other is something that resists this comprehensive capacity of vision or of touch to grasp the other thing. By touching or seeing the face in front of me, I don't get the contents of that face. I don't contain them. Rather, the other remains infinitely transcendent, okay? And it's like the only, he describes as there's like a temptation, the only temptation to try and contain it is to murder it, But if you murder the other, then you don't get the other. So what it is that it's something that remains outside of me and it comes as an epiphany. It's like a revelation. And what's the revelation? The revelation comes from the speech of the other. So Levinas will say that speech cuts across vision. A speech gives you the other's capacity to speak to you, gives you what your vision and your hearing can't really encompass. What you have to have is the other revealing themselves to you. Remember in Existentialism is a humanism, I said the world is the silent world. Well, Levinas is just pointing out that the other is not the silent other. The other has to speak, and they speak on their own behalf. I might ask the tree, what are you? And it won't respond. And the sky, what are you? And it won't respond. But the other will respond, and their response is a response that is beyond me. I can't say what they are. I can't say, who are you? And answer that question on your behalf. I can ask, what is the tree? And answer what the tree is on its behalf, because the tree remains silent about what it is. But the other does not do that. So he says, better than comprehension, discourse relates with what remains essentially transcendent. So discourse, speaking, relates us to what remains outside of ourselves. The word that bears on the other as a theme seems to contain the other, but already it is said to the other who, as interlocutor, has quit the theme that encompassed him, and upsearches inevitably behind the said. So I can say to you, oh, you're a good student, but already I speak it to you. And in saying this to you, you have the option of responding to me. It's like any way I theorize you is not going to capture you, because any way I theorize you can be dismissed by you, and it can be accepted by you, and in either case I depend on your dismissal or your acceptance of what is said. So the knowledge that absorbs the other is forthwith situated within the discourse I address to him. Speaking rather than letting be solicits the other. Speech cuts across vision. The formal structure of language thereby announces the ethical inviolability of the other, and without any order of the numinous, His Holiness. So here he's just saying, it's like language already reveals to you that the other is inviolable. I can't violate you in the sense that there's no way for me to encompass you in my language. You're already beyond that language, beyond anything I can say of you. There is what you can say on behalf of yourself. So now, well, I'm going to read this part and then I'll talk a little bit about Descartes and the third meditation. So this is on 195, 196. I'm not sure, I think you guys might have this stuff in your course packet. He says, in knowledge or vision, the object seen can indeed determine an act, but it is an act that some way appropriates the scene itself. It integrates it into a world by endowing it with a meaning, and in this last analysis constitutes it. In discourse, the divergence that inevitably opens between the other as my theme and the other as my interlocutor, emancipated from the theme that seemed for a moment to hold with him, forthwith contests the meaning I ascribe to my interlocutor. So he's now distinguishing two things: the other as a theme, the other as something that I theorize or that I talk about or that I interpret, and then the other as my interlocutor, as the one who speaks back to me. And for a moment, I can seem to contain you in my ideas, but already this is going to be resisted by you in you being able to speak on your own behalf. The presence of a being not entering into, but overflowing the sphere of the same determines its status as infinite. So, if you think now of Levinas saying, I can enjoy the world, I can eat it, I can consume it, I can turn what is other than me into the same as me. Yes, I can do that to everything except you, except the other here in the capital O, other, which is the other person. The other person is something that is not containable by me. And because it's not containable by me, it's like it's infinite, right? My mind and my capacities grasp what is within my grasp, what is finite, and what is outside of this is the infinite. So my relationship to the other is an infinite relation. You come to me from an infinite distance. Okay, the presence of a being, the facing position, so the person facing you, the facing position is opposition par excellence, can be only as a moral summons. So the other facing me and outside of me is the other in this absolute excellence, and it comes to me as a moral summons. It's now we enter into the realm of morality. Metaphysics has turned into ethics because the other is going to demand something of me. And this demand, I have now an ethical obligation in relation to this demand. I can either listen to what you're saying to me or I cannot listen to it. And if I don't listen to it, I might do wrong towards you. And if I listen to it, then I'm doing the right thing. So already we're talking in terms of right and wrong. The discourse that comes to me from the other immediately moves me into the realm of morality. He says, this movement proceeds from the other. The idea of infinity, the infinity more contained in the less, is concretely produced in the form of a relation with the face. And the idea of infinity alone maintains the exteriority of the other with respect to the same, despite this relation. Thus, a structure analogous to the ontological argument is here produced. The exteriority of a being is inscribed in its essence. Let me read some more. The idea of infinity is produced in the opposition of conversation, in sociality. The relation with the face, with the other absolutely other than which I can contain, the other in the sense infinite, is nonetheless my idea of commerce. So when he says, this reminds us, or it has a structure like the ontological argument, he's reminding us of Descartes. So remember what Descartes had said. Descartes had said, I discover, using the I think, therefore I am, that I exist. But then what proves to me that something exists outside of me? Descartes says, I look around in my ideas and I find that none of these ideas, all of the ideas could have come from me. I could have made up all of them, I could have thought up all of them. But then I find this particular idea in me, the idea of the infinite, and since I'm not infinite and I can't derive infinity, the idea of infinity must have come from something that is itself infinite. This is what proves to Descartes that there is something outside of me. What is the thing that's outside of me? Well, God. God is what gives me the idea of infinity. So Levinas transforms this argument. He says, in fact, when I look into my ideas, I find something that is beyond my ideas. But it's not the idea of like an abstract being like God. The idea that is in me, which I contain in some sense, but which is beyond my grasp, is the idea of you. To contain you in my ideas would be for me to absorb you into me. But I can't absorb you into me. The other remains essentially other. I can always learn from you what you are and what you want to be and who you think you are and how you feel about things by asking you. And I can't, wonder to myself, oh, what would my phenomenology class think about X? And be like, oh, they would think this about X. Anything I say is going to be superficial because what I really need is your response. Your response is beyond me. So for Levinas, Descartes' argument for the proof of the existence of God, that there's the idea of infinity that comes from beyond me and it comes from God, turns into the idea that there is an infinity, but this infinity comes from the thing that is really beyond me, which is the other. Not some abstract being, not the idea of a God, but the idea of the other. So that's the sense which he means that it's like the ontological argument. And now he says, so this is page 99, and yet this new dimension opens in the sensible appearance of the face. So it's like my relationship to infinity nevertheless shows up in my world. And it shows up in me being able to see your face, to be able to touch it, and so on. So a new dimension opens in the sensible, or in the senses. But at the same time, this thing is beyond me. So he says that to kill is not to dominate. So I can't even dominate you by killing you. It's not to dominate, but to annihilate. It is to renounce comprehension absolutely. It's like, imagine that I'm desperate to understand what you are. And I'm like, tell me, and you won't tell me, I kill you. It means that I haven't comprehended you. I haven't taken you in. I haven't dominated you. I've annihilated you. And by doing this, I've lost all chance of comprehending you. I was only able to comprehend you as long as you had the opportunity to speak. It's like you can't force the speech out of the other, and you can't either by consuming the other, just like the food you consume, or by murdering the other. None of them will give you the other. Murder, he says, exercises a power over what escapes power. It is still a power, for the face expresses itself in the sensible, but already impotency, because the face rends the sensible. So it's not that murder isn't power, because obviously, you show up in my world as a physical thing, and by killing you, I do annihilate you. So it's a capacity, but it's like an impotent power. It's an impotent power because it can't get me what I want. If I wanted you to say yes to what I'm saying, killing you is not going to make you say yes. It's going to be the renunciation of the very possibility of you saying yes. So in this sense, I'm helpless before you. What I want from you, I can only get from bearing an ethical relationship to you, by making you either care about me or me care about you, but nothing outside of that. No force that no weapon I can build can make you what I want you to be. I can't force you into being or telling me you're being. So you can't force this infinity of the face of the other. There is here a relation not with a very great resistance, but with something absolutely other. The resistance of what has no resistance, the ethical resistance. So you don't resist me in the sense that you're more powerful than I am. You resist me in this ethical resistance, as he puts it. In fact, it's that you are beyond any show of force. It's like the government right now in Lebanon. They want to get the people to assent to them, and so they send the police and they send the army to try and force them into accepting them. But no amount of force will get the people to accept. The only way to accept is for them to speak to us, and to speak to us in the way we want to be spoken to. If you don't speak to me in the way I want you to speak to me, then you get nothing. You get nothing. You can kill me, you can kidnap me, you can torture me, but that's not going to make me do what you want. What I am is beyond you, and it's infinitely beyond you. You are infinitely beyond me, and so this resistance that's produced by others is an ethical resistance. Pages 199 to 200, now he says, the other who can sovereignly say no to me is exposed to the point of the sword or the revolver's bullet, and the whole unshakable firmness of his for itself, with that intransigent no he opposes, is obliterated because the sword or the bullet has touched the ventricles or the oracles of his heart. In the contexture of the world, he is a quasi-nothing. But he can oppose to me a struggle that is opposed to the force that strikes him, not a force of resistance, but the very unforeseeableness of his reaction. So he says, again, it's not that there isn't any power over the other. He says, the other who opposes to me, who says no to me, they say, I don't agree with you. Their no can go away because I can, pierce you with a sword or shoot you with a bullet, and now you're dead, and you're quasi-nothing, as he puts it. But you've opposed to me, you put a struggle in relationship to me that no amount of force is going to be powerful against. So there's a real resistance in you. And this resistance is partly in the unforeseeableness. So in the fact that I can't think what you are. I can't foresee what you are. I can't contain you in my own thinking. Infinity presents itself as a face in the ethical resistance that paralyzes my powers, and from the depth of defenseless eyes rises firm and absolute in its nudity and destitution. The comprehension of this destitution and this hunger establishes the very proximity of the other, but thus the epiphany of infinity is expression and discourse. Let me just read on and then I'll talk about this. To manifest oneself in attending one's own manifestation is to invoke the interlocutor and expose oneself to his response and his questioning. Expression does not impose itself as a true representation or as an action. So look at how the way he puts it. He says, it's like my confrontation with infinity is my confrontation with your face, which is an ethical resistance, which poses an ethical resistance to me that paralyzes my power. And it paralyzes my power not because you're so powerful, but because you're defenseless. Because I can kill you and I can consume you, but only in a way that would lose you. So, in fact, it's actually your weakness that makes it such that it's like at the same time, you're in a position of weakness because you're vulnerable to my attacks, but you're in a position of absolute strength because no amount of my attacks will ever get to you. To get to you, I need you to talk, to speak back to me. He describes the other as nude or destitute, as in like starving or hungry. It's just think about, the beggar, and the force they have upon you, as they ask you, for some money. It's not, you might feel hurt by this because you would like to give them some money. Maybe you don't have money to give them. But the reason you feel this pain is not because they're more powerful, but because they're so weak. Because the other makes a demand, a moral demand on you to be some way with respect to them. And this is at once a power, but it's also like a weakness. It's like a power that's coming from within this weakness. And the only thing I have is then to speak to you and to let you speak back to me. In doing this, I can't say something to you that's absolute. I have to put myself under your power. At the same time, you're under my power. Okay, so he says expression does not consist in giving us the other's interiority. So when the other expresses themselves, it's not like they've given you themselves. The other who expresses himself precisely does not give himself. And accordingly, retains their freedom to lie. So in my expressions, I can just lie to you. I can hide myself. I can just tell you what you want to hear. And so I resist you even in that way. But deceit and veracity, so being lying and truth, already presuppose the absolute authenticity of the face. What we call the face is precisely this exceptional presentation of self by self, incommensurate with the presentation of realities simply given, always suspect of some swindle, always possibly dreamt up. To seek truth, I have already established a relationship with a face which can guarantee itself, whose epiphany is itself a word of honor. So this is just kind of more of the same, This, by the way, on page 202, that in asking you for the truth, I have to ask you for the truth, and it always remains possible for you to lie to me. It always remains possible for me to say that you once said this to me, but now you're taking it back, and you can always take it back because you're not contained in any bit of expression that you have. So this is, the sense in which the other kind of is infinitely beyond your power, and in which the only way you have of relating to them is through this ethical relation. I mean, later on, Levinas will also talk about love and sexuality and producing children, but in all of these there's always going to be this kind of interruption between me and the other, that the other is what is beyond me and which I can desire to bring closer to me, and which I can he thinks you can love the other, but at the same time they're always going to be in this resistant position. And this is, exactly what he calls infinity. The other is just simply the not containable other. And this is what makes it metaphysics. In any case, guys, so, there's a lot more that needs to be said about Levinas. And, we don't have the time in this class to kind of go over it. But I hope that now you've seen one other element, or how Levinas will bring ethics into it. So it's all of phenomenology had never really focused all that much on ethics. I mean, outside of a few bits, with Hannah Arendt and so on. At least in our class, she said a lot more about ethics, and Sartre also, and de Beauvoir. But the idea is that here Levinas is saying to us that right and wrong are not something I can come up with. To treat you well, I have to just listen to you, and by listening to you, you give me the commandment. Just think of it as really he's replacing God with the other. And this is what, remember earlier he said, the atheist separation. The atheist separation is precisely the idea that as long as I'm enjoying my world, I can eat from it and so on, and this sustains me as an independent being. But in my independence, I confront something that is beyond me, that is vulnerable as well, and now I'm helpless before this thing. For this thing, my helplessness can only be helped by letting the others speak to me, by letting them tell me what I should do, how I should treat them, how I should be right to them, and similarly for them to me. And later on, Levinas will also talk about the fact that even my egoism, my enjoyment, is called into question by the other. Because if I'm sitting there and eating the apple and then you show up and you're hungry, my innocent enjoyment becomes guilt, because now I'm taking the apple that I could be giving to you. And you can really see how this is kind of so moved by the events of World War II, because he's, really moved by these scenes where, sometimes the Jews in the concentration camps would feel bad for the soldiers. That he always has this, he describes in various parts, this scene where these soldiers are going through a very hard time themselves because the Nazi regime is not friendly in a way to anybody. And these, a prisoner sees a soldier, and the soldier is crying because it's just so cold and it's miserable and there's people dying. And then he gives him a crumb of bread, which is the only crumb of bread that he, the prisoner, has. And Levinas really wants us to theorize that moment. Like, how can you be moved by this? How can you be the victim, but at the same time be moved by the oppressor? It's like there's something that comes from beyond. You see these sorts of scenes also very much in the protests that we see today, that sometimes we stand against the police and stand against the soldiers, yet, the protester will, say that the soldier is my friend or the policeman is my friend. They're at once the oppressor, but you can see that, it's like oppression oppresses all of us. It doesn't just oppress, the one who is oppressed. There's an ethicality that we bear to one another that's not... Force is helpless. You can't force anybody to anything. This is for Levinas, kind of a fundamental truth. So the only option you have is discourse. The only option you have is to speak with the other and to let them speak back to you. Okay, there's so much more to be said, and I mean, definitely I think that all this can be explained at a much clearer level, but it would just take so much more time, and so I hope this will be satisfying. Okay, and now I feel like I have to end the class again, but I guess we've already ended the class, but it was lovely to have this class with you guys.